Coming up on Path to Zero.
70% of us can get along if we talk. So 70% wants cleaner energy. They want a wide variety of different energy sources. They don't want to say it's all oil and gas or it's all solar and wind.
Welcome to Path to Zero, the podcast about clean energy and the journey toward a low-carbon future. Your host is Tucker Perkins, President and CEO of the Propane Education and Research Council. Now, here's Tucker.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Path to Zero while we're in Houston for CERAWeek. You know, energy and climate conversations can often feel divided, but there's also a growing recognition that real progress depends on finding common ground across very different perspectives. Our next guest is Bill Shireman, CEO of Solution Citizen. He has spent his career bringing together unlikely partners from corporations to environmental groups to move conflict to collaboration. Bill, thanks so much for being with us on our special edition of Path to Zero CERAWeek.
I am thrilled to be here, Tucker.
Sounds like you have had a really busy week kind of representing your interest, engaging in these conversations. So first off, you're going to speak today, I guess.
Speak today,
and you're
yep,
speaking
yep.
around the evolving energy narrative. Talk to us about that.
Well, you know, the country, if you haven't noticed, is severely polarized and divided between a hard left and a hard right that pretends to represent the mass of the American people, and it keeps us divided. And so we have this policy whiplash between one administration that comes in with one energy agenda and the next administration comes in with a completely different energy agenda, and nobody can predict what's going to happen. So we're going to talk about the changing narrative around energy and how we all, from the individual citizen to the energy executive, can manage through this by adhering to what is real and what is true and what the middle 70% of people know to be true without being contaminated by the extremes.
And I tend to fear, if you sit here in today's lens and you think about a midterm election coming up and kind of, if anything foreshadows, you would tend to think we may have another policy whiplash coming.
Yes.
And let's just call it for what it is. I don't believe in the history of our government we have had such a dramatic shift in policy from one president to the next in the history. I may be wrong, but how do we prevent that?
Well, we prevent it primarily by remembering that 70% of us, from the left to the right, from conservatives on one hand to liberals and progressives on the other hand, 70% of us are able to actually work together to resolve our problems. Now, we are stuck in these media silos, one on the left and one on the right, that pretend that everybody in our silo is fairly reasonable and everybody in the other silo is crazy. And so people are very averse to talking to the other side because they think everybody on the other side is crazy. But the reality is 70% of us can get along if we talk and we can come to agreements. So if we want a stable energy future, we know what that 70% wants. The 70% wants cleaner energy. They want a wide variety of different energy sources. They don't want to say it's all oil and gas or it's all solar and wind. They want a wide variety because people know that that is safer to have energy diversity than it is to put all your bets on one type. And we want it to be affordable. We want it to be sustainable. It's that simple.
Right. It's a great topic, and I look forward to hearing it later today because I think it's one that so matters. And for us, we tend to work with a lot of the innovators, companies who are trying to manufacture things, and a lot of times from idea to design to product can be a decade, sadly enough.
Yeah.
So here we are trying to anticipate what is the climate going to be a decade from now. And to be very clear, this last 3 or 4 years, there's been no clarity at all. And so essentially innovation has really scaled back.
Yeah, and innovation is what we need more than anything else to get to zero net carbon, because we don't have all of the innovations in place yet that can get us there and enable us to be prosperous. But those innovations are close at hand. And if we can liberate our inventors to bring those innovations and deploy those innovations, then we can reach zero net carbon, and we can avoid the worst effects of climate change. And critically, we can also have a prosperous and connected economy and culture where people are actually enjoying our lives together as a community. That's within reach.
So even let's address zero net carbon. Let's I'll be very clear. You use the word net carbon. It's a very important word in that sentence. But I would say quite a few people don't even think carbon is the enemy. When you're talking, how do you say, well, certainly a world using less carbon emissions is better than a world with more carbon? How do you talk to people like that?
Well, we have historically, the world has the industrialized world has always moved from higher carbon content energy to lower carbon content energy. That's nothing new. When you go from wood to coal, you're reducing your carbon output. When you go from coal to oil, you're reducing it. Oil to natural gas, you're reducing it. So all the way through, and that's simply because carbon is a waste product.
Right.
And so as we get more efficient, we naturally are reducing the amount of waste that we are creating as we use and deploy energy. So this is nothing new. There's nothing evil about carbon. Of course, it is the basis of life. It would not be here were it not for life. But carbon as an output of energy is not something that's healthy for us. So we're going to tunnel down on it. But you don't demonize fuels because they contain carbon. You simply allow the marketplace within a framework of policies that help you become more innovative and efficient over time. You allow that carbon to continuously reduce. And that's what we want to do. No big bans on, we don't want to ban oil and ban gas or ban, any particular kind of energy. We simply want logical policies that enable us to thrive with less and less carbon pollution coming from our energy.
You've long championed an all-of-the-above approach, something I tend to not, I don't like that word myself, but I understand it and I get your point. But do you really believe that as we move forward, we want to include all of the above? Or aren't there some technologies we may want to leave behind and some we really push out in the front?
There will be technologies that will be largely left behind, and technologies that will be pushed. We don't burn a lot of wood in this country for energy anymore. I mean, that's kind of evolved out. We don't ban it everywhere, but we don't burn a lot of.
In fact, as we sit here and listen, people in Maine today would be laughing at us because
they say, well,
many of them, that's how they tend to heat their homes.
Sure.
Heat their water.
We need to let people make their energy choices for what works logically for them in their community with their environment. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a policy framework around that encourages us to continuously improve the cleanliness of our fuels. And fundamental to that is an idea that will come, which is to shift taxes from the things that we want, like jobs and payroll and income, to the things that we don't want, like pollution and waste. That includes carbon. It's simply a shift of taxes so that we instead of taxing things that we like and things that grow each year, because we tend to become more prosperous each year. When we tax prosperity, our taxes go up every year. When we tax pollution, our taxes go down every year because the tax plus our normal innovation tends to reduce it. So that's something that has to happen. Right now, we pretend that it's politically impossible because neither the extreme left nor the extreme right will go with it. But the middle 70% will, and because it's logical, it's cheap, and it's good for the economy and good for people.
Yeah. Maybe midway through our interview, it's a terrible time to ask you, but let's talk about your company, Solution Citizen. Talk about kind of what you do, maybe why it was formed, but why it is an important part of this conversation.
Yeah, well, I am somehow a born and bred serial social entrepreneur. I form a lot of nonprofit organizations that are aimed generally at bringing together adversaries who we think are complementary opposites of one another. So I formed a group called Future 500 years ago that brought together groups like, big oil companies and big environmental organizations, Rainforest Action Network and Greenpeace on the one side, ExxonMobil, Mitsubishi on the other side. And we found that we could find common ground that if we brought those forces together. But they needed a place to meet. They needed a place where they could get together and honestly express what their priorities were. And then a magic thing happens. They discover that each one of them is the solution to the problems that they can't overcome on their own. So Solution Citizen takes that a step further and brings together the political left and the political right. Now, they are the complementary opposites. The right, conservatives, tend to look at the world as a place where people are fundamentally selfish, and they will take when they have an opportunity. And the left looks at the world as if people are selfless and will always give, given the opportunity. Those of us who live in the real world realize that people are partly selfish and partly selfless. And so when you bring these two parts together, it turns out that the right is very good at devising social systems like the marketplace that harness selfishness for public good. And the left is very good at identifying what's going wrong and what we're not dealing with. But the left may know the problems, but it's in denial about the solutions. The right knows the solutions, but it's in denial about the problems. So we at Solution Citizen bring them together and focus them on some of the challenges that seem to be so irresolvable in our current political process.
And let's talk about a couple wins you've had. You talked about Exxon, Mitsubishi. I think the one I picked up on was Rainforest Action Network and Mitsubishi. Just talk about an example of a win that you've had with your group.
Yeah, well, as you know, there's a tendency among activist groups to demonize big corporations. And so Rainforest Action Network and Greenpeace and a lot of others demonized companies that were involved in forestry, especially in the rainforest. The Mitsubishi companies were involved in rainforest extraction of timber. And we got involved and brought the groups together. Rainforest Action Network saying that they wanted to put Mitsubishi out of business. And the Mitsubishi companies responding to that, as well, there's no way that we can possibly work with a group that wants to put us out of business. But we facilitated a conversation between the two, and we discovered together that the companies, the Mitsubishi companies, many of whom are involved in consumer products, could drive more sustainable harvesting practices globally simply by preferring sustainably harvested timber in their procurement. Didn't mean they had to pay more. They simply told their suppliers, we will buy from the suppliers that provide the most sustainable available timber products for all of our products. And what that did was create a new incentive for those companies to then provide sustainably harvested timber, which led to 400 other companies making the same commitment, and then led to certification systems so that people could confirm what actually is sustainable, and transformed the global timber industry so that we have a thriving, sustainable timber industry. And it was because not a single law had to be passed. It was simply because those two supposed adversaries got together and said, what can we do in the marketplace to drive better practices? So that's something that came about through bringing those folks together. And we've seen it happen dozens of times, literally.
It's time for a break, and we'll be right back with Path to Zero.
Zero is a big number. Getting close to a zero-emissions future starts with using the broadest mix of clean, low-carbon energy sources. You might be surprised to know that propane produces a lot of energy for thousands of purposes and millions of people, with virtually zero particulate matter, zero impact to the ozone, zero toxicity, and zero potential for storage-related contamination. It's low NOx and low CO2 to boot. Path to Zero is sponsored by Propane. Energy for everyone. Learn more at propane.com.
Maybe I'll win if I zero.
Welcome back to Path to Zero. We're talking with Bill Shireman, CEO of Solutions Citizen. What's an example of a problem you see today that's just right in front of us, such a difficult problem?
Yeah.
And where collaboration between two very disparate sides may be able to start the conversation that drives a solution. Is there an example in front of you right now?
I think, the big example for me, and it's an example that has three parts to it. And it's what we call the shift from a linear throwaway economy to a circular economy. Now, linear throwaway economy is why we have billions of pounds of plastic in the oceans, and why within a generation we're likely to have a greater tonnage of plastic in the oceans than fish, because huge amounts of plastic waste are just flowing into the ocean from economies around the world. How do you deal with that? Well, first of all, you need to have the internalization, as they say, of that cost of waste in the products. You need to create an incentive so that companies can make more money by keeping plastic out of the ocean than by allowing it to go into the ocean.
Right.
So we have a series of new laws that have been passed in 7 states across the country that will accomplish that. And people will see a big change in the kinds of plastic packaging that they're buying at the stores because of those laws, not just in the states where it's implemented, but probably in other states as well, because they'll be shifting. So people will see a change. And the change will be toward more recyclable packaging. So that's a good thing. We'll have higher rates of recycling. Plastic will be diverted from waste and from the oceans into recycling and back into the economy. That's a good thing. But here's the interesting part of it. And this will sound like it can't possibly relate, but it really does. I've got 19-year-old kids. They've grown up in a digital economy where they feel very separated from each other, from the planet, from themselves. They feel often, and I'm talking about kids in general, depressed and without power and without purpose and so on. And we think that that is related to this linear mindset, the idea that we simply extract and throw things away, and that the purpose of the human being is to produce it and consume it, and that's it. And in that economy, we tend to be separated from each other, and we lose the connections that my father had, and that we had to some degree, the sense of connection to family, to community, to each other, and to eternity. Now, when we change our mindset to a circular economy, not only do we start recycling products so that we lose that linear extract and dispose mentality, we start recycling the products, but we also recognize that we're part of a larger system. And people's sense of long-term thinking, of eternity, if you will, of connection to each other begins to be restored. And that helps people feel a greater sense of fulfillment in their lives. So as we advance a circular economy, we not only begin to save the environment, but we also begin to restore that sense of purpose and connection that people are feeling that they're missing. So in a couple of weeks here, we're going to launch something called Circle America, which is an affinity group, basically a set of friends who come together to advance the various elements of a circular economy. And I would invite all of your listeners to join in on that.
That's interesting. And to your point, we talk about plastics a lot. We see the pictures of the Pacific Ocean just full of plastics. I would argue no one listening on this podcast has ever thrown anything plastic into the ocean. So your solution is so complicated and so elegant, but another solution would be let's ban plastics.
Yeah.
Why would you not advocate for such a? We now
Well, of
know
course, a lot of people
microplastics
think-
are a bad idea.
Right.
There's all kinds of bad things about plastic. Why not just ban it?
A lot of people say, let's just ban plastics.
You would say that's a bad policy.
I would think that's an insane policy, because not only is plastic a part of almost everything, it's like saying we're going to ban air.
Right.
Well, air is all around us. Good luck finding a substitute for that. Good luck finding a substitute for the thousands of products that depend on plastic as an ingredient. We don't need to ban it, and it wouldn't be good for us to ban it, because if we tried to produce the value that we produce with plastic, but do it without plastic, we would be substituting products that generally have a more negative impact on the environment and cost more, and we would decline both environmentally and economically. And there's no way that people will put up with that. So talking about banning plastic is fun, but it's not practical, it's not realistic, it would backfire, it would make things worse. But what we can do is begin to internalize the costs of pollution in the plastic and other products, so that the costs that right now are being borne by taxpayers and ratepayers and children and the future are borne by those who produce the plastic right now, not as a punishment to them, but simply as a signal that tells them, let's switch to a less expensive plastic. Once you include the cost of pollution, people make different choices. And they say, oh, we don't have to buy this resin, we can buy this resin. And then you end up with a more recyclable, environmentally beneficial waste stream. It's a pretty simple market economics.
It's a lovely proposal, and I think economists, around the world, and environmentalists around the world probably agree. You've said a couple of times, migrating tax from things that shouldn't be taxed to move it to tax those things that have costs, social costs, health costs. It's such a good solution. How do you keep politicians from doing what politicians do, and that is begin to weaponize those taxes?
That is a really good point, because it comes to the core. Right now, we have a population that is divided, as we know, between the left and the right and cannot get together. That means we do not have a governing majority across the middle 70%. That's the majority that a healthy democracy would be following, but we don't have that. So what do we have instead? Well, because the population can't get together, we have a political system that, love them, for what they're doing, but that is run by political power brokers, by an industry of 3,000 to 4,000 folks who are in the power brokerage industry. And they're doing it not because they're bad people either, but simply because that's how things get done. And in that environment, you can't have fundamental change without essentially paying off each vested interest in line. And so if you were to pass a carbon tax, let's say, right now, with the support of one party or the other party, unfortunately, it would not be a revenue neutral, carbon tax that reduces taxes over here in order to compensate them. It would be a new tax on top of all the others, and that's something that wouldn't be good for the economy. So we need the right and the left, citizens from both sides, to come together. It's the only way to do it, because a carbon tax shift is revenue neutral. There's no big new pile of money to hand out to vested interest groups. So it can only pass with the support of the people. It can't pass with the support of just one party's brokers or the other party's brokers.
In my lifetime, thinking about politics, there have only been a couple times when I thought maybe, to your point, there's a polarized left, a polarized right, and we'll say that's 15% of the people on either side, as you keep talking about 70% in the middle. There were glimmers of hope that maybe that 70% would coalesce and actually become the dominant political event.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be possible. I think about 2 times, in this last election, one of those pretty clear choices, very hard-leaning left, very hard-leaning right, but no middle ground ever surfaced. Do you really think in the world of politics that the middle can rise up and maybe control the narrative?
Yes, I believe it can. It takes a combination of recognizing that that's what needs to happen, and then strategically and tactically taking the steps to make it happen. It will require our intention to save our democracy from this. And there are tactics that we can use, and we at Solution Citizen have developed methods of targeting those voters who are in that middle 70% who decide the outcomes of races in the competitive states and competitive districts. So we know now who they are and how to reach them. And it's a matter of shifting our dollars from a system that tries to win elections by activating extremists to finally come out to vote, to a system where we win elections by activating those in that broad center to come out to vote. When we do that, politicians have to follow the broad center. It changes the dynamics. It's very close, but I think the sense that most people have that it's impossible is the only thing that makes it impossible. And people have been very effectively convinced that there is no talking to the other side. It's just not worth even trying.
Yeah.
And if it's not worth trying, we're not going to do it. And if we don't do it, we will lose our democracy. So I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to give up on our democracy.
Yeah.
And I don't think most Americans are.
I love that people like you have the vigor to fight the fight. It's awesome. And I cannot wait for your answer to this question.
Yes.
We have a little magic wand. We give it to you to use it one time for one thing in the next year. So lots of ones that you think would have the biggest impact on improving climate, improving quality of life. Bill, how would you use that wand?
Boy, how would I use that? How would I use that wand? I would use that wand to unify a group of Republicans and Democrats and independents in a movement that is self-aware of problem-solving voters who will only vote for candidates that bring solutions and put them on the table, not for candidates that just bring anger and hatred and polarization. If we had a small group, and I tell you it would take really only a couple 100,000 people, because most of our presidential elections are decided by less than 100,000 people in a few states across the country. It's unbelievable how small that number is. If we had, let's just say a million votes, that's what my magic wand would be, to gather 1 million folks across party lines to say we are only going to vote for problem solvers. We would solve our democracy problem, which would lead us to solve our climate problem and Social Security and Medicare and every health care and every other problem that we have. We actually, the middle 70%, could find solutions that right now are not politically possible in our polarized environment. So that's my magic wand wish.
I love the question and I love the answer. Thank you so much for that. Bill, we love to recognize your expertise, your time spent with us on Path to Zero, kind of your efforts even here in Houston at CERAWeek, by planting a tree in a national forest of your choosing, but in honor of your time and in your name. Now, I know you're a Bay Area, California, San Francisco guy through and through.
Yeah.
Is there a forest that you would like us to plant that tree?
I think, the one that comes to mind, of course, is the forest surrounding Yosemite National Park and the Sequoia region. I would love to have a tree planted in that national forest. So,
It's so funny. Sometimes you know what people are going to say, and then when you know what they say, they go in a completely different spot. But I'm always impressed when people from the Bay Area pick something in Yosemite because it's arguably the most beautiful spot in the world.
It's a stunning, inspiring.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What a beautiful spot.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, is there anything you want to talk to us about, maybe what you're doing here in Houston, how we can find more about Solution Citizen, something you're up to? Leave us with what you'd like us to know.
Yes. Well, come to our new site. Now, as we're doing this, we have not even launched Circle America, but circleamerica.us is our new site for advancing a circular economy, and we would love to have those 1 million people that my magic wand was waived for. We'd love to have those 1 million people sign on, because together we truly can save our democracy, and with it save our environment, our economy, and all the rest. So that would be my
that's exciting.
my earnest request. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I think as you and I were talking before this, circular economy is a very European term, I find, that we don't talk about much in
Not
the
a
U.S.
lot,
I tend
not
to
a
be in
lot.
the middle of a lot of those conversations.
Yeah.
Yet, I would argue, I can certainly argue, my father and his father before him, they very much lived closer to a circular economy.
Yes.
A lot of thought about what they were choosing how they were using it. Could they reuse it?
Exactly.
And
exactly.
a lot of effort about that. Clearly, their energy, the energy intensity of their lives was significantly less than that of mine or my children.
And their sense of wholeness and their sense of connection and their sense of having a purpose, serving their family, serving their community. I mean, that was alive in them in a way that we're lacking right
And
now.
how to leave less of an impact on
Yeah.
the earth, for sure.
My dad, every day, we'd go out somewhere. The dictum was always, leave it better than we found it.
Right.
And if you do that with your life every day, if everybody did that with their lives every day, what a world we'd be in.
Well, Bill, we look forward to your talk later today. Glad to get the chance to have this visit, and we look forward to learning more about you. But for sure, thanks for being with us on Path to Zero.
Thank you, Tucker. I appreciate it.